I'm honored to be part of your world up in Virginia. And let's just talk a little bit about all the amazing things that happen with trees. And I'm embarrassed about this first slide, but I'm going to show it anyway. But here I am in 5th grade having a wildflower collection that I, as a nerd, as a geek, as a kid that went along the roadsides and pressed flowers in telephone books in the days when telephone books were made out of paper, and took this thing to the New York State Science Fair and actually garnered a 2nd prize, surrounded by 500 boys with volcanoes exploding with baking soda. I just was very motivated, but very shy and very geeky. And I think to myself, you know, if I could write a book so that girls and boys could read it and say, it's okay to be different, it's okay to be a little bit weird, and maybe someday you can do something good for the planet. That was really my goal for writing the book called The Arbornaut. So here we go. And my childhood was as different as anybody else's. I grew up in upstate New York in a pretty small town that was pretty economically depressed and is now. But the cool thing is, guess what? Every fall the leaves turn red and orange and yellow, and I was mesmerized by that. And holy cow, when I got to college, someone told me, well, guess what? In the tropics, they stay green all year. So I got very infatuated by leaves. Pretty boring for a lot of people, but for me, that was kind of cool. And I looked in my family tree and said, like, well, how many Laumans were scientists or contributed to the world in this way? And I found out of 178 ancestors in my upstate New York hometown, nobody was a scientist, but my great-grandfather did turn the corn into something during the Prohibition that was very botanical. So I guess in the end, maybe I had this little bit of botanical litany by taking corn and turning it into whiskey, which is not unlike how many treetops are turned into medicines in cultures all around the world. So unfortunately or fortunately for my poor mother, I became this tree climber at a young age. And then in my career, I became one of the world's first arbonauts. And as Julie said, arbonauts explore the treetops. Aquanauts explore undersea, astronauts explore outer space. So here I was with these crazy things, most methods of which I had to develop by myself or with a couple friends. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those coming up in this talk. But the amazing thing about going into the treetops some 40 years ago at the beginning of my career is to find out that half of the biodiversity in the world on the land part of our planet lives in the tops of trees. And unfortunately, only about 10% of that has ever been classified or discovered. So we have this unexplored continent. I call it the 8th continent. And it's extraordinary to think that. And I had no idea as a young graduate student that was the case. But when I first climbed a tree, I couldn't believe all the stuff that was up there. And this picture depicts a few of those things. The dogwoods in the top left from your beautiful state of Virginia are all flowers, and fruits are at the top of the tree, as is the light and the rain. And so it's no surprise that's where all the action is. And that cute little ant, which numbers in the zillions in tropical rainforests, has a beautiful camouflage. His butt looks like a leaf. How clever is that? To avoid being eaten by a bird. And maybe that frigate bird on the right, coming from the Galapagos Islands, where the canopy is only about 10 feet high, has that fantastic red pouch to attract a female for a mate. And along the bottom, we have the koala on the left, which loves to eat leaves and the canopies of big Australian gum trees, or beetles, which number in the millions all over the world, or even something cool like the red-eyed tree frog in the forests of South and Central America. So we have all kinds of crazy and wonderful things living in the forest canopy, but nobody knew that for 200 years because foresters used to walk on the forest floor, look at the tree trunk. If anything, to see the canopy, they cut the tree down and then all the insects got smushed and the birds flew away. So nobody ever knew that the canopy was this hotspot of life until a couple of us started climbing in the 1980s. We have amazing, cool creatures like sloths, and we have little microscopic creatures like water bears. And I told the students today in high school and middle school, you've got to Google tardigrade, which is its own phylum. And these cute little microscopic creatures are doubtless the commonest species in the Virginia forests, as well as the Florida forests, because they live by the thousands in drops of water, on leaf surfaces, in tree bark, on mosses. So guess what? You're surrounded by tardigrades and you probably never even knew it. So in my book, I go through a chronology. I mean, I'm probably one of a handful of people in the 21st century that can actually say I discovered a new science and I defined a new science. So I chronologically described what we all did to make this science real. And of course, we developed those canopy climbing gears in 1979. I welded a harness from a piece of metal and I sewed, I welded a slingshot from a piece of metal and I sewed a harness with a sewing machine and a piece of seatbelt webbing, and I borrowed a rope and up the tree I went. And then by 5 years later in 1985, everybody wanted to climb a tree, but I couldn't take 10 people on a rope or it would be absolutely dangerous. So I helped design the first canopy walkway or treetop walk, but all in Australia, where I was a graduate student at the time. And then I got really engaged in the whole global issues of canopy science because it was so new and so important. And we ended up with a committee to design construction cranes around the world to work from there. And also, I came back to the States from Australia and built the first canopy walkway at Williams College, where I was a professor. And then I got involved in a global team to use inflatables in the canopy, which was really fun and very cool. And lo and behold, I moved to Florida as the first ever canopy director of our botanical garden and built the first public canopy walkway down here in Sarasota, Florida. And to do that, I had to make a foundation so people could give tax deductible donations. So today we still have this tree foundation that helps fund really important programs to save big trees, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And all of that is summarized in my book, The Arbornaut. I beg of you to read it only because A, you might have a new perspective and appreciation for trees, and B, you might read the book and then give it to a girl who might benefit from all of my misadventures in science, as usually the only female in the classroom or on the expedition. So I do dedicate my book to girls in science and the next generation. Mind you, I'm a mom with 2 boys, so I think it's important for boys to read about science as well. So I would love both genders to appreciate my book. And there's the cover. Jane Goodall's been a mentor to me, so she endorsed it, which is fabulous. And it does take all of this history of canopy science intertwined with my crazy stories about falling out of trees and finding new bugs and taking my little boys up into the treetops at age 6. So I hope you'll find it entertaining as well as sobering to learn about all the facts we need to know about trees, because right now almost nothing is more critical for our children and grandchildren than keeping the forests of the world. So in the book, as well as in life, I learned a lot of things that I needed to share about trees. And that's partly what comes up in the book. But one thing is I've lectured at a lot of business schools and alumni corporate groups. And guess what? Nobody learns in business school about the dollar value of trees. And so when I lecture to these kinds of people, they come away saying, holy cow, we had no idea that trees were worth so many zillions of dollars to us. You know, they produce fresh water by cleansing water through the foliage and circulating water through their systems. They produce oxygen, timber, food, and clothing. Their roots conserve soil and keep it from rushing downstream and going out into the ocean. You already know that half of the world's species live up there. And when we got into the treetops, we found out, guess what? Trees are storing carbon, which is unfortunately a byproduct of all of our human pollution. So that makes it super important. And trees, of course, control our climate with rainfall and atmospheric conditions and all sorts of things. Last but not least, 2 billion people in the world rely on trees for spiritual stewardship. Ethiopia, Asia, many, many countries in Africa use trees as this incredible spiritual renewing area, which is worth a ton of money if we could only value it in some dollar sign. But for now, we have to know that trees are really, really important to our life. And we've had some amazing successes in my world. I build canopy walkways. I've discovered that these canopy walkways can bring amazing economic success to local people through ecotourism. And this fabulous newest walkway, I'm proud to announce, was funded by one corporate sponsor in Malaysia. And not only that, but we just a couple weeks ago got UNESCO World Heritage status for this whole forest, meaning that a quarter of Malaysia is now saved in perpetuity for everyone's children and grandchildren, because this walkway fostered canopy research and biodiversity surveys. And in the end, the United Nations has honored it with a UNESCO status. So this is the kind of outcome that we would hope to gain now that we know that forest canopies are really the elixir of health and life on Earth. Another thing in my book that's really important to me and hopefully to you is that I try to advocate for kids. And lots of kids love to climb trees. Raise your hand if you like to climb trees. I sure do. And in my hometown, which is kind of economically deprived in many ways, we have a treetops camp, the Meg Lauman Treetops Camp. And this girl and these girls on the left are all part of a summer session where, you know, they have very, very challenging and difficult lives and are economically underserved. But we take them tree climbing, we teach them about biology, and maybe for a few of them, that will be the key to taking on a career someday in science. And here on the right are my third graders at the Canopy Walkway here in Sarasota, Florida, where I live. And these young kids at the age of 10 made observations and found a whole new species of weevil eating in the treetops. And guess what? They got to be published. They are now full-fledged scientists without a PhD or anything fancy, but it just illustrates that when kids make observations and do good things in the treetops, they can also make cool discoveries. I've had a lot of students with difficulties and challenges. For 5 summers, I had a program through the National Science Foundation to take kids who were mobility limited and try to help them access field biology. Usually they're told, oh, stay indoors and take notes in the laboratory, but all these kids were dying to be out in the forest. So we created some methods with pulleys and special apparatus to allow them to become arbonauts too, which was very exciting. And guess what? They all discovered new species in the canopies of trees, mostly water bears, but that's very cool. And they could publish it and be able to say, I too am a scientist, despite my mobility limitation. Just a little case study to kind of remind us where we stand. In my lifetime alone, 50% of the world's forests have disappeared. In the last 2 years, as you probably know, forests have burned in many countries. And so one of my favorite examples of a success story is Ethiopia, where less than 4% of forests remain in the northern half of the country. And most of it is subsistence agriculture because people have no tractors, no irrigation, no metal tools. So they are really struggling to produce enough crop to save and feed their families. But these little enclaves of green native trees are what we call church forests, because in the middle is a church, the Ethiopian or Orthodox Coptic Church, and all the priests believe they are the stewards of all of God's creatures. And I, as a scientist, believe I am the steward of biodiversity. So together we have forged an incredible relationship over the last 10 years to save these last forests for this country. And here's a Google Earth image of all the subsistence agriculture in these teensy weensy bits of remaining native forest. Very scary. If we don't turn this around in the next 5 years, all the native birds, plants, and insects of Ethiopia will be gone. It's that much of an issue. So we have to all work together. And it's not about just saving trees in our own backyard, because a lot of these trees have medicinal uses. And for all the people of Ethiopia, they have important functions for oxygen and climate and everything else. So we need to save these amazing genetic libraries, as I call them, to save them for the next generation. So what are we going to do in Ethiopia? I went there as a guest of the only forest conservation biologist, and suddenly we were a team to say to ourselves, guess what? We have a huge challenge. We need to save the last biodiversity of Ethiopia in the next 10 years. And so here's what we did. We befriended the clergy, the church priests, who are the stewards of these last remaining forests. And this amazing gentleman is the chief priest of northern Ethiopia. And we have become such close friends. He's actually even built me a cottage on his church property. So when I come there, I can live next to him. And he has said to me, please promise you will never leave this project until we save the important genetic library of Ethiopia. So I have made that promise and I will uphold that promise. But every successful conservation project is based on trust. It's not about technology. It's not about cool data or publications, which we scientists are trained to think give us promotions. It's really about building local trust and helping to save local ecosystems. So with Ethiopia, the solution was amazing. One was educating the priests who have no access to computers or science books or Google Earth images, and telling them about the importance of their trees. And the second was about them coming back to me and saying, guess what? We have a great solution. Let's take the stones out of the farmers' fields, which they love. Let's build walls to keep the cattle and sheep from eating all the trees, and also keep the farmers from plowing into the trees and destroying some of them. So lo and behold, we created this amazing project with conservation walls surrounding church forests. And hopefully the bigger challenge is, how do we educate the kids about the importance of their biodiversity? So whenever I go to Ethiopia, I have 300 kids helping me collect bugs or look at plants or do whatever it takes. But the bottom line is, one of the most important things I did, which did not earn me a promotion at any American university, was I wrote a children's book in their native language and handed out for free to the kids at these rural schools who, guess what, have never owned one book in their life, who don't have pencils or paper in their school, who don't have a library in their school, much less a computer. So giving them a book about the importance of Ethiopia's trees has been maybe my best contribution to science ever, even though it never earned me a dime or a promotion at all. But I think in this world, we have to be innovative and think differently about how can we help every country save their trees? And for some of the poorer countries and the emerging countries, it's not about just paying a lot of money to put up amazing conservation national parks, or paying lots of corporate people to stop polluting, but it's about how do we educate kids in really simple situations and make a difference for their education levels. So this is the book. If you go on Amazon.com and order one copy of Beza, Who Saved the Forests of Ethiopia, One Church at a Time, that price of $20 will fund one copy to be printed in Amharic, the native language, that we can distribute to the schools. And so to date, we have distributed thousands of books to rural kids, but we have thousands more to go. And again, how do you educate kids in a community where there's no computers to give them CDs and there's no science textbooks? We have to think outside the box in order to help all those billions of people in countries that really are not as fortunate as America is. So here are our walls being built. It's very exciting. Here is a finished wall outside of Bahir Dar, Ethiopia. You can see the stark difference outside the wall, inside the wall. But we're really excited, like many countries, to make innovative differences in how things need to work. And now we're studying the biodiversity there, thanks to National Geographic, to figure out all of the cool new species. But underlying all this is the big challenge. You've probably seen in the last couple of years, forests are burning, forests are being cleared, urban expanse, farming, timber getting, all these things are destroying our native forests. So what do we do? So my last chapter in the book, which I'm really happy to say, because I could never write a book without some kind of hope message at the end, is to launch a new project called Mission Green. And this project will globally promote conservation of forests, economic stewardship by the local people, and research by both local and international students. So Mission Green is based on a model by a really cool friend of mine named Sylvia Earle, who started a program called Mission Blue 10 years ago. And she said, what if I identify hope spots in the ocean worthy of saving? Don't fund them, don't do anything but bring the attention of the local people to these amazing hotspots of biodiversity and help the world know how important they are. And since 2010, in 10 years, she has found 127 of these places and given them some global attention in hopes the local people will really get excited about saving them. So Mission Green is the same method, but it's on land. And I've had the blessing of an amazing world famous biodiversity scientist, Edward O. Wilson at Harvard, to be the emeritus chair of the board of Mission Green. And in his latest book called Half Earth, he lists the 10 forests that are the most endangered. So we took that list and said, guess what? We've got to make a genetic library for those forests so we can save them before all those animals and plants and bugs disappear. And so we have a world-class scientific board with all sorts of cool people. We are working in Madagascar right now to build a walkway with Pat Wright, the lemur expert. We're working in Ethiopia with Alamayu, an Ethiopian expert. And so we need local trust and local friendships to make any conservation project a reality. Many big NGOs say, oh, we're going to take $1 billion and go into Brazil and save the country, but they pay the money to the government and nothing ever happens. But you need local trust and you need local relations for good things to happen. So our next steps are using our 10 canopies to trial new education programs, to build walkways, to fund student scholarships, to, in the case of the Amazon, hire our first ever educator from the indigenous tribe to create a curriculum for all of the walkways. So we're very, very excited about how we can make canopy walkways a success, because a canopy walkway creates an ecotourism opportunity, meaning that we can hire local women and families to work on these walkways, to host visitors, make a sustainable income, and in turn say to themselves, we need to save these trees, not sell the timber for a very short-term profit. And then if we're really successful and fundraise a little bit more, we can fund students to come down and study this incredible biodiversity in these canopy walkways. So I love to invite you to join me. Please read the book, and especially the last chapter, to learn about Mission Green. Please think hard about the fact that in that last chapter, I give you 10 ways you can save forests. locally, globally, individually, collectively. But right now, our kids and grandkids will never, ever have a life if we can't save big trees. It's not about planting seedlings, even though that's wonderful and fun to do. It's about saving those big trees, which house all the biodiversity, produce the oxygen, control the climate. And I really hope that you will join me in that quest, because that's what my book is all about, trying to summarize that really important global story before it's too late. So with that, here are a couple websites if you're interested in more information. And I'm going to turn it back to Julia or someone. I'm stopping share so that we could entertain a couple questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meg. What a fabulous, fabulous mission you're on. I'm now intrigued. How high off the ground are most of these walkways? I mean, it's hard to imagine how high up you are.
That's a great question.
Grandfather Mountain Bridge, swinging bridge.
Yes, I've been there too. It's amazing.
I mean, a comparison to something like, I mean, how high are you?
So guess what? The best biodiversity is about 3/4 up a tree. So in Florida, where we have short trees, it's about 35 feet high. But in the redwood forest, it's about 150 feet high. Wow. And in the Amazon, it's about 150 feet high. So every forest is different, but you learn something from every single height. And that's part of the adventure and the exploration.
Absolutely. And I see a summer camp idea germinating in my mind. I'm sure.
Good. And I could send you tree climbers. You've got to do that in Virginia. I would love you to do that.
So I'm sure we have some of our park department folks with us tonight. So I'm like, let's talk. Sylvia Earle, I knew we'd have a maritime connection to bring in tonight. So thank you for that. She's one of our favorite scientists at the Marine Museum, and very, very happy that she has worked with you. And she wrote one of your introductions, didn't she, to the book?
She did. She wrote the introduction to the Arbornaut, and we're doing a program together in December. I'll send you the link.
Awesome.
Because, she's explored. We're nicknamed Her Highness and Her Deepness. I'm Her Highness and she's Her Deepness. So we love to joke about that.
I love it. I love it. I have to share with the audience. Here are Meg's personal goals. Now, I might think I have something big to do when I get up in the morning, but here are Meg's personal goals: to mentor 10 million children, sell 10 million books, speak in front of 10,000 corporate leaders, conserve 10 million acres of forest, and establish 10 walkways in 10 high biodiverse forests, where women and indigenous families can earn a sustainable income from ecotourism and not logging. So give us a status report.
Well, I'm not sleeping, of course, but anyway, I think the book is doing great. And I have, thanks to a lot of virtual Zooming, reached a lot of kids, but not the goal yet. And we have a walkway in Malaysia now, a walkway in Florida, a walkway in the Redwoods, where a walkway is being built in Madagascar this year. So we're maybe 40% toward that 10 forests. But there's still I hope, like Sylvia, that 10 is not a stopping point, that's just a beginning. Right. Because a lot of forests, the Great Smoky Mountains, deserve to be on this list, because they're so highly biodiverse. But we need to make connections and create those local partnerships to succeed in all of these programs to make sure that biodiversity and ecosystems are conserved.
Well, you're doing an incredible service to the trees and to the world, and the fact that UNESCO has recognized your work is pretty incredible. Right. Yeah. I'm sure, Tim, you said you had a question for Meg. Do you want to ask that now?
Sure. So you showed that you had the balloon in the 90s that you were using, and so I was wondering today, are you using drones to do surveys and get data?
Yeah, such a great question, because right now we have drones as well as this thing called LiDAR, which is sort of like satellite imagery coming out of airplanes that have very high powered cameras. And they are fantastic for detecting poaching, for finding toxic emissions into river systems in the Amazon, for example, where gold mining or illegal oil drilling is going on. And they also help us with the direct biology, like how many trees are flowering of a certain species at a certain time, because an overview is fantastic. But what we've also discovered is we need both tree climbers and technology to work together. We can't detect everything off of a screen or a photograph. We can't, for example, figure out which beetle is eating the leaf, or which insect is pollinating the orchid. So we need biologists who are young and vibrant to climb the trees, to look at that up close data, and then combine it with this technology of drones and LiDAR. So between the two, we have this much better view of the forest, which is very exciting.
Thank you. George Curran asked, where is the walkway in the Redwoods?
Oh, great. It just opened in August. It's in Eureka, California at the Sequoia Zoo. It's on the edge of their property. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I did a fundraising talk for their board and their community, and bingo, one thing led to another. They got some great donors and they built this walkway. It's in a young redwood forest, which is kind of humorous because the trees are only 100 years old, which is really young for a redwood. So the canopy walkway only goes to about 100 feet high, but it has tripled the visitorship to their zoo. It has been a fabulous addition. And again, it's just like our little Mayaca walkway here in Florida has 500,000 visitors a year, $30 million input to the county. These walkways we're finding give this economic boost to the locals. And if we can do that in some of these tropical countries, it makes such a difference where they will not be tempted to log their trees. And that's really the aim of these canopy walkways, to produce that boost in ecotourism and economics, which will be so important because the people need jobs. Let's face it, they can't live in a bubble without any income.
And oh, it just flew out of my brain. Darn it. I had a real question for you there, but it's gone now. Sorry.
Okay, we loved it.
Any other comments or questions for Sylvia?
I love being called Sylvia. That's such a compliment.
Your Highness, I love that. And her
Exactly.
deepness. That's fabulous. We want you to keep us informed of what's going on. Please do send us.
Oh, please. I will send you some things. And guess what? In my dreams, we'll build a walkway in Virginia. You'll be part of it. We'll get out there in the Great Smokies and we'll help all your kids discover biodiversity through webcams and things like that.
I think it'd be great. I see one question coming in. Have you found bats while climbing? You must have.
Absolutely. And bats are really important pollinators in the tropics, not so much in the temperate zones. And so we love that. But you know what else? Bats love to pollinate right about halfway up through the trees, like the chocolate plant and some of these other things that are sort of in the understory. And so that's fabulous in its own right. But again, without climbing the trees, we never would have understood the role of bats, which is really very cool.
Well, this has just been remarkable, and I know we've all got to make sure we share the book and your website with others.
Oh, thanks, Julie. Well, let's keep in touch and we'll get an update maybe in a couple of years. I'd love to come back and do something wonderful with you.
And your talk will go on our YouTube channel in about a week. So all of you viewing, make sure you share that with your friends and family that weren't with us tonight. You can view it again or for the first time. And we appreciate you and all you've shared with us tonight. It was fabulous. Our next evening lecture, as Jenna has said in the chat, is December 9th. So we're going to go not in the treetops, but to the really cold Arctic with Andrea Pitzer, who will talk about William Barrett's 3 Arctic explorations back in the 1400s. And it was quite a grim and real survival stories. And I said we would do it when it's really cold. So today it's 75 in Virginia on November, whatever it is. But maybe by December, when Andrea speaks, it'll be a little cooler for that Arctic tale. But we appreciate all of you being with us tonight. Kudos to you, and we look forward to your being in touch with us. And thanks everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your week. Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Julie. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye.